Now that we are all connected, I welcome everyone to today's webinar covering the cybersecurity and the RED directive impact of the harmonization of standard EN 18031. I'd like to remind a few points before we begin. This webinar is being recorded. We will send you the recording and presentation after our session. As we have many participants today, we have mute everyone. You can post your question in the question and answer window. We will answer them at the end of the webinar. If we have not answered all the questions, we will send answer with the presentation and the recording. Now I'm going to pass it on to Jérôme Hamel.
Okay, thank you very much, Aurélie. So, yeah, first I just briefly introduce myself. So I'm Jérôme Hamel. So I'm in charge of the cybersecurity technical governance within Bureau Veritas Consumer Product Services, which is a global organization within Bureau Veritas with several labs over the world. So in China, Brazil, Taiwan, France, and Germany for the cybersecurity testing, especially of product cybersecurity testing. And we, through this governance, we are making sure that we follow all regulations, standardization, latest news, and latest rules, and also that we apply the same methodology everywhere in the world. As introduced by Aurélie, the idea is really to focus on the RED cybersecurity. So we did in the past at least 2 other webinars on these topics. The main changes this year compared to last year is, of course, the fact that now the 18031 has been standardized and has also been harmonized end of January. So the idea is really to highlight what it means for you as manufacturers to use this standard and to prepare your compliance for the deadline, which is end of August. So we will first, as an introduction, explain what has been harmonized. So there are a few restrictions in the harmonization that I will explain. Then we will focus on how to evaluate the 18031 compliance. And so there are several concepts for this, especially conceptual and functional evaluation. And still there are some other ways to demonstrate compliance. And we know several of our customers are also using different standards, so the ETSI EN 33645 and the IEC 62443. So I will also explain also how we can use this standard to demonstrate the compliance. And in the end, I will explain about the type examination certificate and also highlight the usual questions that we have from our customers. So first part, so as a reminder, we are talking about 3 requirements, which are each of them is focusing on a different point. So the RED Delegated Act has introduced 3 new requirements. The first one, 33D, is focusing on making sure that any product will not have a negative impact on the network on which the product is connected. The 33E is making sure that any private data handled and personal data handled by the device is enough protected. And the 33F is focusing on the fact that any monetary transaction that could be done with the device is done in a secure way. So 3 different focus and 3 different standards which were published recently. So regarding the RED DA, we had several steps. So it was published initially in January 2022. Then there was a decision to write dedicated standards which were written within 2 years, and they were finally published in August 2024. And so there are 3 standards, one per requirement that I mentioned before. So the EN 18031/1 is focusing on Swiss 3D and so on. And a new step has been achieved when these 3 standards were harmonized, but with a restriction in January 2025. Still, the deadline for every product put on the market to be compliant is August 1 in 2025. So these are basically the key dates to have in mind. For the first point, and so in this webinar, I will especially focus on key questions that we had the past months with our customers. So the first one is, of course, is my product applicable for this 3 requirements? And so this is the table of decision which is published in the standard. And basically, we see that the first important point is to decide whether the device is on internet connected radio equipment. Then you have additional decision point to know if you handle personal data, if it is a childcare or wearable device, and if you handle monetary fraud. But the key question that we had is really, how shall I decide if my product is internet connected or not? So basically, there have been several discussions in several bodies about this, but there is no strict rule to follow to decide. But what we apply on our side and what we say to our customers is that even if you have an indirect connection to the internet, so the usual, when we talk about IoT, it means that, so you have, for example, a sensor which is connected to a gateway or concentrator, which is then provided the connection to internet. And possibly the sensor has no TCP/IP stack. Still, so there is a way to access to internet. And the rule basically that we think is acceptable for the manufacturer is if there is no data which is exchanged at all between the sensor and internet, then it's not applicable. But as long as you have something that is exchanged, and the typical data which are exchanged are, if we talk about upload, is data collected by the sensors, but that will then be sent to the cloud to be analyzed. So then it means that there is an exchange between the sensor and internet, so it's applicable. And if also a typical case is you have, as part of the standard, to be able to perform some software update, and often the software update is downloaded from the cloud, possibly through the gateway and apply on the device. And also in this case, because you are downloading something from internet, this is applicable. So of course, this is always the responsibility of the manufacturer to decide if the requirements are applicable to its device or not. On our side, as notified body, we can talk with you, but our role is to decide if a device is in conformity with the regulation, but we are not there to decide about the applicability. This is really the manufacturer responsibilities. And also, one key point is when you decide that it's not applicable for your device, we think that it should always be justified by the intended use of the device, and often with at least a minimum cybersecurity risk analysis, which is showing that if there is a way to access internet because of the way the device is used and because of the associated risk, you consider that it is not applicable. So you can provide this justification on request. So this is for the applicability. And, about the harmonization itself. So I took this information from the CEN-CENELEC, who wrote the standard, and also provided some analysis of the restriction. So basically, we will focus on 4 restrictions. So the first restriction is about the rationale and guidance which are provided as part of the standard. So what is explained in the restriction is that this guidance and rationale should not be used as strict rules. So the idea is that you cannot use this rationale and guidance to demonstrate compliance. It should be used only in a way to better understand the spirit of the standard. So this is really what it means. But still, we think this is very useful to read and understand the rationale and guidance. The second restriction is more concrete, so it's linked to a requirement. So it's applicable first to all 3 standards, /1, /2, and /3. And basically, it says that if you do not force the user to use password and to use default password, then you cannot use the harmonization. So it means concretely that in your implementation, you should force the user to use the password if you provide password. Otherwise, you cannot benefit from the harmonization. So this is quite easy to understand. The third restriction is this time only applicable to the /2 standard, 18031/2. So basically, this is the fact that when you are using a toy or something that is for children, so when you are in one of the use cases that I showed in applicability, so if you are falling in this category, then you have to get the approval for private data from parental or guardian control. So if you don't do this, then you cannot also benefit from the harmonization. So basically it means that it is considered that the privacy should not go beyond the fact that parental and guardian control decisions are more important, let's say. And the fourth restriction basically is about the authentication in case of payment. So this is really applicable only on 18031/3. And basically what this restriction is saying is that none of the method which is described as implementation. So you know that in standards there are some implementation option that you can use. So none of the implementation by itself is good enough. So they basically think that it's better to have a dual authentication. This is also something to consider if you are falling under the 18031/3. So if you follow these 3 restrictions, then you can benefit from the harmonization. So then how do we evaluate EN 18031? So one thing which is quite important is to understand that the standard is not only dealing with requirements which have to be implemented on the product, so technical requirement. It also explains how this requirement should be evaluated to demonstrate the compliance. And basically, the standard includes the concept of three types of assessment. The first one is conceptual assessment, which is basically dealing with the security by design. So it means that in principle, by construction, your product is compliant because the design is following what has been defined in the standard. So it's something to evaluate, let's say, before implementation, so through the different design document. And then there are two types of evaluation, which is to check that the implementation has been done properly. So the first one is the functional completeness assessment. So basically, the idea is to make sure that whatever has been declared as part of the conceptual assessment is really implemented as described. So basically, when, for example, if you have some internet port and you are explaining that some of the ports are closed and some of the other ports are open, in the functional completeness assessment, it is needed to check on the product itself that this is really as per described in the design. So this is really adequation between the conceptual, the design and the implementation. And the third category, which is functional sufficiency assessment, is making sure that the level of implementation of the feature is good enough. So follow the best practices in place. So and also has enough resistance to the expected protection. So basically, for example, if you want to be protected against brute force, so I mean to avoid the password to be used easily, then there will be some brute force test that will make sure that this is indeed the case, that the password are strong enough to avoid brute force attack. Fuzzing tools, for example, can be used to make sure that the device is resilient to malformed data. So this is a kind of first level of resistance verification. And also verification of the strength of the implementation, so the strength of the algorithm, the strength of the security function, and so on. So what is important to know is if you want to use the fact that the standard is harmonized, you should not only declare that you have implemented the feature as described in the standard, but you should also have evidences of the three types of assessment which are described in the standard. So the standard both provide the requirements and the way to evaluate the requirements. So then, in the standard, there is a key concept which is the asset. And so depending on which requirement from the regulation you follow, you have different type of assets that are applicable. So there are always security assets, and then there are assets which are dedicated to each standard. So network assets are related to 33D. Privacy assets are related to 33E, and financial assets to 33F. And here you see basically a typical example of assets that you need to protect and that basically when you will perform the assessment, you will need to demonstrate that the different requirements from the 18031 are indeed compliant with the protection of for each feature of these assets. So basically, there is also the notion of security parameter and security functions, which is so you can see the example. So security function is a mechanism, and security parameter is a parameter of the function. And the security assets are always linked to a network asset, financial asset, or privacy asset. So the idea is the security asset is there to protect a network, financial, or privacy assets. So this step to identify assets is very important because this is, let's say, the starting point of all the evaluation. So the way that we suggest to manufacturer to do it is really to perform a cybersecurity risk analysis, and especially what we call the data flow diagram, which is identifying all the external entities to the product. So what are the different entities which can exchange data with the product? And then what are the sensitive and confidential data which are exchanged or stored on the product? And what type of communication interfaces are used? And when you have defined this and the associated risk, then you also have more or less a good idea, depending on what countermeasures in terms of cybersecurity are implemented on your product, which asset you need to consider for the evaluation. So this is really an important step and a key step for the assessment of 18031. Another important point to understand in the 18031 is what we call the decision trees. So the decision trees are mostly used for the conceptual assessment to decide about two things. The first thing is whether the requirement is applicable or not, and the second thing is if the requirement is applicable, is it implemented in the expected way. So here we take the example of the first requirement, which is ACM, so access control mechanism. And you can see that before decided that, so first you will take each asset that you have defined in the previous step, and you will define whether this asset is falling in the category that it needs to be protected by an access control mechanism. And basically, the way the standard was designed is to allow some acceptable exception or use cases, which will allow a manufacturer to say this asset does not need to be protected by an access control mechanism because it falls under one of the exceptions. So, for example, if we take this ACM, there are three exceptions. The first one is whether the asset is by nature supposed to be public, so then there is no need for an access control mechanism. The second exception is the asset protected by an other way, which could be a physical or logical measures, like an access control within a specific room, or an access control via the connection to an authentication server, which is not located on the device, but that allow to check this. So this is decision note 2, and decision note 3 is you cannot do it because the legal implication make it impossible. So these three exceptions can be used to say, for this particular asset, I don't need to implement an access control mechanism because I am falling under one of the exceptions. So these are, let's say, the predefined exception. And then you may have also, and this is something that we, let's say, decide as notified body, you may have additional exception that will lead to not applicable for your particular case. But in this case, because it's not predefined in the standard, it needs to be justified by the cybersecurity risk analysis. So this is something that on our side, we consider if it is well justified by the cybersecurity risk analysis. So, and then regarding the compliance itself, so this one is very simple. It's just checking that there is indeed an access control mechanism, which is making sure that only authorized entity can access the device, but it can be some more complex verification. So when the requirement is supposed to be applicable, then you have some checkpoint regarding the way it is implemented. So this is also something that is important to understand when you will perform the conceptual assessment. So then how it is done, basically in the project we are doing with customer, we are providing some forms that needs to be filled by the customer, which based on the requirement and on the definition from the standard will basically I'm going too slow, I think. We basically show each decision node. So here, for example, if I take still the same example for a Wi-Fi key, which is the asset to protect, you have you are not falling under any of the exception, and so yes, you are implemented control mechanism, which is the Wi-Fi authentication, and then you have a pass. So the way to perform the evaluation is via this Excel file, and also we know this is quite difficult to manage via forms, so we are also basically launching something which is should be available soon, which is a web interface which allows to fill all these different information. And so, yes, so the manufacturer needs to fill this, and the lab will has the role to check that everything is done as per defined in the standard and is well justified and is correct, basically. So this is the role of the lab regarding the conceptual assessment. So the functional assessment itself is something which requires the device to be available and available also with its environment. So for example, if you have a device which is supposed to be configured with an application and which is supposed to provide some data to the cloud, then when we do the testing, we need a representative environment of the device, so to have also the different accessories or different cloud access in order to check the exchanges that will be done and the different functions that will be triggered by exchanges, for example, between the application and the device for the setup and the configuration, and in operational mode or in maintenance mode, the different way the device will interact with external entities. So basically, when we have this environment, the idea is to check via specific tests that the implementation is done as expected, so with functional testing. And basically, this type of tests require really to have cybersecurity expertise and specific tools and evaluation techniques. So I took two examples here. The first one is for software update mechanism. The idea is that we will check via a command line that indeed if the protection is via signature, that the signature is indeed applied and verified. So this is something for this sum. And if we take the example of GEC1, which is a general equipment capability, focusing on the fact that no public non-exploitable vulnerabilities should be present when the product is launched. Here it is needed to check that what are the known vulnerability based on the software of the product, and whether these vulnerabilities have been indeed fixed by using the latest software version or mitigated in case they cannot be fixed, or if the latest version are not used. So basically, for each identified vulnerability, potential vulnerability based on the software, the idea is to check that it is mitigated enough. So basically, it cannot be done without tools, and also by checking concretely that the exploitability is not possible. So here, for example, there is, let's say, a first level of penetration test, which is done by the lab in order to check that the vulnerability are not exploitable. So yeah, what is important to retain here is that most of the time it's very difficult to perform this functional assessment by the manufacturer itself, because it requires quite some experience and some tools, and yeah, so this is required basically the assistance of a cybersecurity lab. Okay, just other example. So then, how do we perform typically a product evaluation up to the issuance of a certificate? So the first point is really to work on this risk analysis, asset identification, to collect all the information coming from everywhere related to the product implementation. Then to perform the conceptual assessment, so via the filling of the Excel file or the web interfaces. Then it is evaluated by the lab. Then there is a practical assessment, which is a functional assessment. And also there could be some fail at this point to create a report. So this is the report that should be used either for self-assessment or to issue a type examination certificate as notified body. And the typical time is here. And what we know by experience is that the first phase is often what takes longer. So I think I have some here. Yeah, so this is a difficulty because we did now many projects in that way, and what we see is that the difficulty is really for the manufacturer to fill out everything, so the different information which are needed, because of two reasons. The first reason is that the information are very detailed and precise, and often one person is not able to fill everything by himself and needs to communicate with different part of the organization, either internally or with suppliers, in order to get the right level of information. So which is the first difficulty. And the second difficulty is about the fact that the standard is not so easy to understand, and the interpretation often is not easy, and this is also where we can help a lot the manufacturers. So the solution that we propose to help this phase, which is very time consuming on manufacturer side, is to offer interpretation support on the standard to the manufacturer. And we will launch very soon also the web-based interface, which will allow the manufacturer to fill by himself everything and to get some help from the interface, including via an artificial intelligence and some predefined guidance, which are coming from our accumulated experiences on other products. For the functional assessment, what is important to know is even if in principle the conceptual assessment is successful, still we are finding most of the time some fail when we are checking things in reality. So it means this fail triggers some fixes or some changes in the implementation sometimes. So to fix the fail case, or it needs to be justified by the risk analysis that the failure is acceptable in the case of the device. So this is another reason to also really have a strong cybersecurity risk analysis, even if it's not mandatory for the compliance. It is very useful to justify something that is potentially failing during the functional assessment. So I would say this is really our key experience feedback that we have at the moment regarding the project that we have been doing. So it was for the 18031, but as I said, there are still some other possibility to demonstrate compliance to the regulation. So to summarize the way to do it, so because now the 18031 is harmonized, if you follow the restriction, so you don't need to go through a type examination, a notified body. But if you are using the 62443 or the ETSI EN 33645, you still need to go through the notified body. And we see a good part of the customer that we have who are still willing to continue with this standard, which are older than the 18031. And the main reasons that we can see for this is basically they got some requests as part of their RFQ to be compliant with the ETSI 33645 or the 62443. So basically, instead of implementing and making verification on two standards, they prefer to get compliance on one standard and then based on this compliance to demonstrate compliance to the RED. Then there are also some internal policy within the company which are in place for several years to be compliant, for example, for every product on ETSI 33645 or 62443, and then it does not necessarily make sense to change the internal processes and so on to be compliant with 18031. And the last reason is also a better match with the Community Cyber Resilience Act. So, as you know, the Cyber Resilience Act will replace by end of 2027 the RED, but will also have a larger scope. And basically, some manufacturers prefer to stay on the existing standard rather than move it to the 18031. So in case you are using one of these two standards, what is important is to make sure that you have evaluation or assessment which can demonstrate via evidences that you have covered the conceptual and functional assessment. And basically, so the conceptual is always the same. This is a demonstration by design. And in terms of functional, there are some predefined methodology for both standards which are in place that needs to be used. So basically for the ETSI EN 33645, you should use the 103701 evaluation methodology. And for the 62443/4/2, you should be compliant also to the 4-1, which is the process part. And the process part has a requirement for security verification and validation, which ask some testing for the security feature and also some vulnerability and penetration testing. So if you follow the SVV defined as 4-1, it will also make sure that you have enough evidences to have your product to be certified for the RED. So here, this is just how it is done when you are using these two standards. So you can, the idea is to reuse the mapping which is defined at the end of the standard, so 18031/1/2 and/3. At the end, you have basically for each requirement, both for the 303.645 and 4-2, some equivalent requirements. And also it says whether the conceptual assessment is needed or not. And so based on this, you can provide your evidences. Yeah, and so there are sometimes some differences in terms of, even if you follow the mapping is not exactly one-to-one. So some requirements are only partly equivalent. So if I take the example of the GEC1, which requires that there should be no public non-exploitable vulnerabilities at the time of the release of the product, then in the EN 303.645, the requirement only asks that you are able to identify new vulnerability and deliver patches later on. So it's not exactly the same. And so this is also something to consider when you are using this table with the mapping. So here, this is an example of what we expect in terms of test reports when this is not directly the 18031 which is used. The idea is still to have a summary of all the 18031 requirements and how they are covered by the other standard. So, for example, here, it is an example that we have for the 303.645 evaluation. And here you can see that this requirement for the 18031 has been evaluated through the EN 303.645 with this provision, and this provision has this verdict. And some requirements were not evaluated via the EN 303.645, but directly with the 18031. And in this case, you have a pass. So, yes, this is something really to consider when you are using not directly the 18031. So that is in case of usage of other standard. And the last part is about the type examination certificate. So, of course, you don't need to go to this step if you only want to use your own declaration, self-declaration based on a test report. But so still, it's interesting to know what kind of information you need to have. So basically, the first thing to say is, so we are the LCIE, Laboratoire Central d'Industrie Électrique, from Bureau Veritas CPS. We are notified body for this cybersecurity aspect. And one first important thing to know is that you can use different notified body and different certificates for the cybersecurity and the non-cybersecurity part. So, for example, you can decide to have a certificate only for the cybersecurity, or you can decide to have a certificate for the radio with one notified body and cybersecurity with another notified body. So then the information that you need to have is the application form, which will explain what product you want to certify, who is the applicant, the owner of the certificate, and so on. The technical document, which is basically the test report and the different associated evidences, all the information about the software and the SBOM. And then you have what is called technical compliance folder, which is basically listed all the information related to the product itself and especially non-cybersecurity information, which is something that you, if you know the process for the RED, this is something that you are supposed to maintain anyway in your company. So one important point as well to know is maybe because the regulation will be mandatory 1st of August. Many companies wants to get all their product certified or ready, and basically you may have a long list of products, so a big portfolio. But in this case, you may also have one system, IoT system, which so maybe the product will only be one of these access point, or would be the switch, or maybe there will be also some sensor or some IP cameras. So you can, and this is something that we have done before, you can evaluate the whole system as part of one or several evaluations. So it means that, as you know, the standard is focusing on assets, and you can identify the assets for your whole systems, and you can also consider external entities between them. And so basically it's possible, of course this needs to be discussed, and the best way to confirm this is to have the data flow diagram and risk analysis, but you can perform one evaluation, one or several evaluation for one system, and not necessarily one evaluation by product. So this is something really to have in mind, that can facilitate your life, and also the way to the compliance. So basically, yeah, of course, all these products, for example, have different radio characteristics, but from a cybersecurity point of view, they can be evaluated all together. And then it's possible to also deliver one certificate that will cover the system. And another usual question is when you have several products which are quite similar, or at least they are sharing the same cybersecurity characteristic. And so it means the same firmware, but they have different hardware, different radio characteristics, different color, different form factor, but still it's possible to basically demonstrate compliance by similarity. And the way to do it is to evaluate one product which is representative of the family, and then to provide some documentation showing that the other product shares the same cybersecurity characteristics. And so here also, if you do that with us, and you can demonstrate this also through the risk analysis, that they are all sharing the same characteristic, and in the end, maybe only one certificate will cover several products from the same family. So yes, also it's not mandatory to do a risk analysis. You could see during the presentation that I mentioned several times that it could be useful to have the risk analysis to justify several things. And so on our side, we strongly suggest the manufacturer to do it. And these are the main reason why we think it's needed. First, to confirm about the applicability. So especially when you want to decide that it's not applicable, to confirm families and maybe the number of evaluation which are needed in order to cover the whole portfolio from your company, to confirm which are the assets to be protected. So let's say the first step of the evaluation. And then if you have some non-compliance and you have not implemented everything which is defined in the standard, but still you think that your product has low enough risk that it can be put on the market and it can be justified for the rate, then the only way is to demonstrate this via a cybersecurity risk analysis that the associated risks are acceptable, which is very often needed. So basically, when you do a risk analysis, the way to do it, so it's also mentioned in the standard. So we do it on our side with the STRIDE methodology, which is the main methodology which is used, and also one of the methodology referenced in the standard. And all of this can be done via remote meeting. We have some templates that we are using to do it via information that you provided to us. And in the end, we can deliver the risk analysis, which is also something that can be updated depending also on the result of the EN 18031 evaluation. So the idea is to have really a risk analysis which is dedicated to the need of the rate, based on all what we list here. Okay, and I think that's it. Just on time, I think.
Thank you, Jerome, for this very interesting presentation. We will have few minutes to answer your question, as we are joined by Amin Kirat, Cybersecurity Sales Manager. I'll let you, Amin, the end to read the question so Jerome can answer them live. And if we are lack of time, we will answer your question afterwards.
Yes, we can't answer all the question, but we will get back to you by email. And you can also ask me question by email after the webinar. But yes, maybe Jerome, I don't know, I can see some question.
Yeah, I'm sure no password restriction.
Yes, for the can the client use different tools for the functional assessment?
Yeah, so I mean, you say, can the customer use different tools for the function? Yes, sure. I think especially the interfaces, the physical interfaces and technology which are used are different. So for Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, Zigbee, cellular, some tools are different in order, for example, to analyze the traffic on these interfaces and to check if, for example, something is ciphered, if there is no something password going through the interface which is unclear. Also, when you have different OS which are used, the way to check the vulnerability on the OS may be different. So yes, the tools are dependent on let's say each product. But of course, there are some common tools, and as a cybersecurity lab, we have all tools which are needed for, let's say, the large range of products. But I'm not sure if it was a question, but it's not a fixed list of tools. This is a set of several different tools.
Okay, and we have often question about the -2 and the -3, and when some data may be shared between the user and the manufacturer, is it necessary to use the EN 18031-2?
Between the user and the manufacturer, so it means, I think I don't understand this question. Where is it written somewhere?
Yes, Jerome, you can click on the Q&R.
Yes, I think.
And you can see the questions.
But in general, Jerome, the -1 is enough. You can say
when some data may be shared between the user and the manufacturer. No, I think this is more complex. This is, the 18031/2 is to be used when you are handling some personal data, and you can refer to the OGDR to decide if it's personal data. Then one important point for this is if the data is stored on the device or if it's not stored on the device and is only transiting through the device, then you may justify that it's not applicable. But if it is processed on the device or stored on the device, then it is applicable. So we could see, for example, some data which are just, let's say, transiting through the device to the cloud. So in this case, it is okay to consider that it's not applicable. Yeah, okay.
Maybe last question, Jerome. Can you give us more information about the restrictions of the standard?
I think this is what it was the first part of the meeting of the presentation. So
yes, but because one client said that as we have restrictions.
Yes, if these clauses do not apply to the product, yes, it means you can use it straightforward. So, of course, the restriction, if you are not using any password at all, then and you apply only for /1, for example, you have no restriction which are applicable to your product. So the restriction are on specific case, and if you fall in this specific case, you should make sure that you don't fall in under the restriction.
Okay, thank you. I think it's as I said, we can't answer all the questions, but we will get back to you by email. And if you want, you can also ask me question after the webinar.
Okay.
Thank you, Jerome, for sharing your knowledge today, and I warmly thank you for attending our webinar. We hope it has been useful. I wish you a good rest of the day and see you for future events. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.